Welcome to the fifth and final masterclass. But I'm glad to say that this is not the end of the Smart Town journey. I've been mentioning this journey we're on, but certainly this is not the end of that journey. So I was looking back at my calendar last night, and we started the Smart Town journey 6 months ago on October the 1st. And with that event was looking what was happening in Wales specifically. So from then we developed the Masterclass series, which cast the net wider, bringing together some of the brightest minds in relation to smart towns. Luckily, and that's one of the upsides of COVID, we have recorded every presentation, and they all form part of the Smart Resource Hub, which Thomas will introduce later on. And last week, Clive, Linda and myself also looked back at the series as part of the Smart Towns podcast. So that's the first podcast of many we'll be recording over the next year. So we won't be looking in too much detail at what has been, but I would encourage you to listen to that podcast. And Linda mentions what we've learned, and Clive also gives his views on what he took out of those masterclasses. But we don't want to stop now. The masterclass have whetted our appetite as a collective, and given the significant challenges facing the high streets, the Welsh Government are very eager to build on the interest generated as part of the masterclasses. So they, as part of their support package for support package for town centres, they have allocated money for the Smart Towns programme over the next 12 months. So we want to make this the year of smart towns, and hopefully it'll last longer than that. So I would like to introduce you to the core team that will be delivering the programme over the next 12 months. There will be more, but these are the key individuals. So Clive, and you've met Clive before, has been driving adoption of smart technologies in Cardigan for the last 4 years. And he's made the digital physical in a typical small Welsh town. He's been there, he's seen it, he's bought the t-shirt, or should I say cardigan. He will be front of house, running workshops, engaging with towns and sharing his experience. So he's a key individual in the team. And Linda, well, she has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things smart and knows anybody doing anything in the sector. So it's great to have Linda on board. So Linda brings a different dimension to the project. And she raises our ambition from really wanting Welsh towns to be smart to making Wales a smart town leader. So it's excellent to have Linda on board. So Linda's role will be to support the pioneer towns that can demonstrate use cases and explore opportunities to add value to the programme, and also develop partnerships within Wales and beyond Wales. And also, and this is I'm very glad to have the support of Thomas, who until recently, until COVID struck, was studying for a PhD in medical science. He's new to smart towns, but he's learning very quickly. He's had a baptism of fire over the last 3 weeks. So although he's new to smart towns, he has a background in collecting and analysing data, and will be very useful to the project. So Thomas is the innovative project coordinator for Meistr and will be responsible for coordinating the programme. And also I'd like to mention briefly Peter Williams, Darren Maudsley and Matt Perryman, who are officers within Welsh Government who are part of our steering team and very much part of this delivery team as well. So that's my brief introduction to where we are now, and I'd like to hand over the reins to Linda now. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, David. I'm just going to share my screen. And yeah, just making sure that you can see that. I just wanted to go right back to the beginning, actually. And in the first masterclass, we talked about the broad discipline of smart cities and how that applies to towns. And just to give you a recap of that, we'd started to talk about what was going on in the Barcelonas and the Glasgows and the Londons. And that was about kind of 10 years ago when the whole idea of smart cities started to come to the fore. And what we've seen since then is that as the technology has become better and faster and cheaper, and as we've seen more adoption of technology and societal change that leans more towards technology solutions, We've seen this reduction of urban scale through national cities, and we had certainly we'd heard from Cardiff and Aberdeen on the first webinar, and we'd seen how they'd started to adopt various use cases that the global cities had demonstrated worked. And now we're starting to see smart towns like Cardigan, towns like Bournemouth, really looking to this technology to make it work on that very local scale. So as the urban scale comes down and the affordability increases, now really is the time to start talking about smart towns. But we also have to think of what we're trying to do. This is not just about technology for technology's sake. So we've got to really clearly think about what's going on out there and what we want to try to do. So if we think about the external drivers that are happening in our world, there's the obvious recovery from COVID-19 that's taking place. But also we mustn't forget about climate change and devolution, the ageing population, and this increasing social inequality. And they're just to name a few of the context in which we live in the 21st century. And we also have to think of then the high level objectives. And again, you'll recognise some of these objectives that we have. Again, a very high level, drawn down, I guess, from sustainable development goals, but actually put into the Welsh context. And still they're at that very high level. So what we're trying to do is think of that, but drawn down to our town scale. And on the other side of the equation, we've got what can help us deliver those objectives. And on the Smart Towns journey in the masterclasses, we've talked about a lot of the technology pieces. We've talked to connectivity infrastructure, sensors and gateways, the Internet of Things, big data analytics, and we've touched on things like artificial intelligence. And it's great to have those as building blocks for what we're trying to achieve on the other side in terms of driving outcomes. But where most cities and towns fail is joining those two things together. And I kind of like this cartoon because sometimes we're very guilty of holding up these big lofty ambitions, throwing in technology and expecting them to perform miracles. And we all know that just doesn't work. But time and time again, unfortunately, we do see demonstrations of this where we're expecting it to work. So what we want to try to do at that strategic level is bring down these objectives into something very local, very measurable, something that means something to your town. And then start to look at how we can use the building blocks, whether your town is set up to have those building blocks in place, and then how we build those bridges to delivering on those objectives. So that's what we're aiming to do with the workshops and the pioneer towns and the frameworks and use cases that we're going to be discovering on this year of Smart Towns. And as David said, I think there's a real chance for Wales to be a leader here. We're seeing lots of pockets of activity going on across the UK and across Europe and elsewhere, but there's nothing really cohesively going on. So I think the collaboration that we could get going amongst the towns in Wales has the possibility to really demonstrate leadership in the rest of the UK and beyond. Thanks, I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you, Linda. So I'll be giving a short presentation now in Welsh on the main elements of the programme. So if you want to click on your interpretation and select French, and I will then try to share my screen. Okay, felly,
therefore, to begin with, I just wanted to mention briefly the
Smart Towns
Wales scheme.
llythrennedd Trefi Smart yn ysgynigolion a grwpiau ar lefel lleol, rhanbarthol.
Literacy amongst individuals and groups on a local, regional and national.
12 mis, ond fyswn ni'n gobeithio bod rhan fwyaf o drefi a swyddogion perthnasol mewn llywodraeth a llywodraeth leol yn dall beth dyn ni'n lygu pan ni'n deud y gair smart town a sut bys hwnnw'n gallu dod a buddion i'r trefi sy'n cyfer rhan. Felly mae hwnnw yn amcan dwi'n meddwl sy'n realistig o fewn 12 mis nesaf. Fel oedd Linda'n sôn, mae'n bwysig bod ni yn cydweithio a rhannu gwybodaeth gyda rhanddeiliaid yng Nghymru a thu hwnt. Dyna lle mae'r partneriaid ehangach yn dod i fewn iddi. Mae pobl yn mwynhau rhannu datrysiadau. Maen nhw'n wedi bod mewn sawl cyfarfod yn trafod sensors IoT, mae pob efo defnydd gwahanol i sensor IoT. Felly, da ni'n gobeithio bod mi fydden ni yn creu sawl llwyfan i alluogi pobl rhannu arfer da, rhannu straeon, rhannu beth sy'n gweithio a rhannu beth sydd ddim. Da ni'n awyddus iawn i amlygu esiampla arfer da. Yn barod, mae gennym ni esiampla yn Aberteifi, mae drefi eraill yn gwneud gwaith arbennig o dda yn y maes yma. Felly, da ni eisiau rhannu esiampla arfer da a da ni eisiau pilota technoleg newydd. Felly, sut da ni yn wneud hyn? Wel, mi fydd Clive fel Linda'n sôn yn mwy manwl am hyn, ond jyst am roi braslun i gychwyn. Byddwn ni'n rhedeg cyfres o weithdai sydd wedi bod yn dref smart. Yn mynd ar rywun sydd yn gwybod dim am dref smart i sefyllfa lle mae gen nhw gynllun gweithredu mwyn symud y dref ymlaen. Oedd Linda wedi cyfeirio at yr trefi blaengar yma, y Pioneer Town. Felly, da ni'n chwilio am rhai trefi i gweithio'n agos efo ni i beilota datrysiadau penodol iawn. Nes i googlo Pioneer Town neithiwr a nes i weld be oedd Pioneer Town. Oedd o'r hen drefi yn America, y salon, mae'n gobeithio fydd yn trefi ni yn edrych yn mwy high-tech na hynny. Da ni am ddatblygu'r ecosystem. A fel da ni'n sôn yn gynharach, da ni angen darparu cymaint o lwyfannau a phosib mwyn rhannu arfer da, rhannu straeon, gwneud cysylltiadau. Ac fyddwn ni yn gwneud y LinkedIn, y Twitter, y Facebook ac yn y blaen. Ond ar ddiwedd y dydd, da ni jyst angen pobl i drafod, cyd-drafod, a fyddwn ni'n agored iawn i hwyluso hynny. Felly, mae croeso chi gynnig sylwadau neu awgrymiadau sydd mae'n gwneud hynny. Bydd Thomas yn sôn am yr hwb adnodda. Yn barod efo'r masterclasses mae gennym ni y cyfres o gyflwyniadau bob math o dechnoleg. Mae hwnnw gynnon ni rwan, oherwydd Covid, ni'n recordio bob dim, mae hwnnw gynnon ni ar y safle YouTube. Ond hefyd, mae gynnon ni gysylltiadau, dogfennau, cyflwyniadau, a dros amser, gobeithio erbyn diwedd y 12 mis yma, mae gynnon ni hwb adnoddau sylweddol mwyn drefi a cynghora llywodraeth cael mynediad at y wybodaeth yn ni. Ac yn ola, da ni am comisiynu dadansoddiad o ffynonellau data defnyddiol. Gall fod ar gael i drefi, ond ar hyn o bryd, dwi'n gwybod bod o yna. Gall fod yn data ar wariant, gall fod yn data ar drafnidiaeth gyhoeddus ac yn ymlaen. Felly data sydd ar gael yn ella sydd ddim yn cael ei defnyddio ar hyn o bryd. Felly, jyst i orffan, da ni wedi datblygu'r cynllun yma yn eitha cyflym ar cyd efo Llywodraeth Cymru. Ac mae elfennau mae'n rhaid i ni wireddu. Ond dwi'n awyddus iawn i bwysleisio, dyma mae'r tîm i gyd bwysleisio bod hwn yn yr raglen hyblyg a dynamic. Fedrwn ni newid pwyslais, fedrwn ni newid cynnwys, fedrwn ni addasu yn ôl gyfynion trefi a swyddogion perthnasol. Felly, mae'n bwysig bod o'n ddeialog byw yma dros y 12 mis nesaf a bod ni'n cyd-dysgu wrth fynd ac yn addasu wrth fynd hefyd. Felly, dyna'r cyflwyniad a wedyn meith Clive wan i fewn i fwy o fanylder ar y gweithdais. Clive will now go into more detail on the workshops. So, over to you, Clive.
Thank you, David. And I'll do my presentation in English then. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I've just got the one slide, and I'll just talk around that then. So hopefully you're seeing the slide. How's that? So the plan is to look at some focus workshops split across 3 subject areas. And between each of these workshops, then we build an action plan. So those that register then for the workshops, we're going to try and have lower numbers so we can be more focused and be able to actually have a bit of dialogue and bounce ideas and actually build action plans. And for those that are somewhere along the journey, some maybe haven't started at all, some maybe already have the technology and don't know how to use it. So we're going to try and have a baseline understanding before we make a start in the workshop by having some kind of, during the registration process, some baseline questions. So we understand a bit more about the towns that we're going to be corresponding and working with. So just to go through each of the workshops, and the first one then is Know Your Town. So maybe many of you already have got, maybe like I have for Cardigan, a brand book for the town. So in here, all my values and what the Cardigan is all about is there. But do you have one for your town? So we could look at that, the aspirations of the town. Is it an engaging town? Is it economically strong? What kind of things do you want it to achieve as a town, as a high street? And then the attributes. What are the strengths? What really draws people to your town? What are the features, the characteristics? Try and draw those out then. And together then with the aspirations and the attributes, then you look at part of the action plan in terms of maybe making some kind of marketing collateral. And I always refer back to what we've done in Cardigan. I designed a leaflet with a new map on it, in keeping with the town's characteristics and everything. As well as this, because this smart town journey we're on will need people to drive it in these towns. So we're going to need to look at how is that going to happen. So I've been in meetings across Wales with individual towns, and sometimes it's the town council, sometimes it's the chamber, sometimes it's a new group of people with just good ideas who are driven in the same direction and have got positive energy to bring it all together. So we need to identify who are the champions, basically, that will deliver this smart town journey and for the benefit of the town. And so that's the first workshop. So we then move on to the next workshop then. And this then looks into the technology that can be implemented into the town. So the infrastructure that could be put in there. So for example, on the Wi-Fi, maybe apps, maybe a bit of IoT, all depending on, again, what kind of smart elements that the towns have identified they're looking at doing to measure with those attributes, aspirations, etc. And with that then as well, of course, is what kind of digital skills are going to be needed, not only for maybe the people that are going to try and deliver this, but also what the town, traders in the town itself may benefit from. And there may be an element of signposting here, because we're not going to try and reinvent the wheel, because there are a lot of resources out there for digital skills. But it's something that we need to just cover off. And also then the barrier busting side. To get some of this smart technology to be put in place, there will be barriers to overcome. From personal experience in Cardigan, there were barriers that we needed to overcome to get the systems in place. And so you need to get a buy-in from all sorts of stakeholders. And this, again, is a role possibly that, going back to the high street champions and the organisation, will have to look at. And then we move on to the third workshop then. So we got the tech is, right, so how are we going to interpret this information? I'm going to set objectives. So we can have some smart objectives. So we could say, for example, we want to increase the level of stay time, how long people are staying for longer, basically. So we could say we want to stay from, say, 25 minutes to maybe an hour, which means that there is guaranteed at least 2 purchases maybe on the high street. They've not just gone in and come out again. And this relates back to something which I didn't cover off actually in the first workshop, which is called the sticky streets. And that is to make sure that people stay longer. We're going to try and cover that as well in the workshop. Maybe it could be as simple as street furniture or outdoor patios for hospitality. What kind of things could be added to the street to make the dwell time increase itself in the town? Then we're looking at the analytics side. So the data that's going to come in, what kind of tools there are, and what kind of form it takes. So you can actually look at the information and then try and interpret that data into useful information. So you then be able to gather this information from all forms of technology. And then the final element then in the third workshop is how then you use that information, how do you distribute the information, and how do you educate and help support the high street, the smart town, in terms of using this information into decision making. So informed decisions being made, basically. And there are examples that we've used on some of the case studies that have already been issued by the Smart Town project. So throughout these 3 workshops, there'll be identified actions then, and hopefully at the end, we'll be able to help implement some of these actions. But a lot of it will be signposting. You know, Thomas is going to mention the resource that'll be as well. And, you know, as a team, and as David mentioned, the program is quite flexible because it's quite innovative. We may change directions. We may do more specialist workshops as well to go more depth in some of the subject areas. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'll hand over to Linda, I think now, is it?
Yeah. Great. Okay, let me just share my screen again. Okay, great. Can you see that actually? Yeah, okay, brilliant. Sorry, I've just got. So just to talk a little bit more about the context of the workshops in the context of the framework and the pioneer towns. So the understanding our towns, as Clive outlines, is the series of workshops, and also try to develop what we're calling a maturity model about our towns. So getting to know the towns that we have across Wales, and that's not just kind of identified towns. It could be an area in a large city, for example, because sometimes you know, the smart projects in large cities get applied to the centre rather than the outskirts. So we're not being prescriptive about our definition of towns here. It can be at that kind of community high streets level that we welcome input from people as well. So we're looking at this kind of maturity model, and a lot of that I think will fall out of the workshops in terms of getting to know the towns, some of the audits that we're doing, knowing where we can, where you've got the skills already and where we can start to plug the gaps. And very much this is about the enthusiasm and the need that you have to drive these outcomes. It's not about actually the expectation of you having that technology expertise at all. We can provide that. We can signpost and we can draw on the ecosystem to give you that. So that shouldn't be a barrier to participation. It's really about the outcomes and driving those outcomes that are technology enabled. So that's the kind of understanding piece. And then we're going to focus on these use cases. So when I showed before, the drawing together of technology and outcomes, we think the fast track to that is to build on what's gone before. So let's look at very common use cases that have already been executed well in smart cities, in national cities, and what can be applied at that town level. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's use tried and tested solutions that we can go ahead, we can right size for the challenges for our own towns, and we can pilot them. And so I'll be talking about a list of common scenarios that we'll go through some of those and get you to vote for your top 3. And also what we want to do with the pioneer towns is to try to get a balance of things that have been tried and tested, but we also do want to try some new things that have maybe never been done before. So we don't want to exhaust ourselves with always kind of living on the edge of technology, but we do think that some of our towns are ready to to adopt quite leading edge technology in that regard. So we'll be looking for that balance of following what's been done before, but actually being pioneers in our own right in some technologies and use cases. And just referring back to what David said about the flexibility, this is all about being agile. And one of the tenets of the agile processes is about build, measure, learn. So we want to baseline what we've got. We want to build an experiment. We want to run the experiment, measure, and then learn from that, and then go right the way around again. So this is all about experimentation. And so we'll be taking our cues from you as well in terms of how you want to shape this program going forward, and very much working iteratively on all of these use cases. And the framework itself of the Pioneer Towns is actually going to be over the course of the year, and we'll be running 4 cohorts. So we're probably looking at about 1 a quarter. And we'll probably look at 2 use cases per quarter in that regard. Again, all of these details are to be defined and to be discussed in collaboration with the towns. And we're going to follow a lighthouse town and follower model that's been very popular and successful in other smart city initiatives. So we'll in a use case for a certain scenario and technology, we'll get one town to actually try that in the first place, and then actually perhaps in the next cohort we might get a couple of towns to follow their lead, and thus we're building up a collaboration of towns that can learn from one another. And so the network becomes more sustainable in terms of the help that's around. And so when we've gone through that process over 4 quarters, we might end up with potentially about 5 unique use cases, but we might have trialled about 30 different projects. So again, we'll be flexible about this and very happy to hear your feedback on that approach.
Thank you very much, Linda. And
okay.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm just going to talk about the use cases there. So, so just to really drill into some of these use cases and to get your feedback, I'm just going to go through the top 10 that we've got here, and then after I've finished talking to the slide, I'm just going to run a quick poll. So if you can think about, out of these use cases, what your top 3 might be, that will be really helpful input for us going forward. So just to talk briefly about them, we've got use cases around air quality, and that could be the measurement of outdoor air quality or indoor air quality. Parking is a very hot topic, we know, and some of that is around managing parking demand, especially in tourist towns, but others might be around more monitoring or around payment or enforcement. And again, lots of different solutions that span all of those different variants of parking. Crowd management, that's becoming a very popular use case post-COVID. Video analytics in terms of how busy is your town outdoor, but also indoors, how busy is it indoors, and is there an occupancy sensing project that we can run, so you can give people a feel of, if they're traveling to a destination, how busy it might be when they get there. Other use cases are around wayfinding. So how do you navigate towns as a visitor or a tourist, that town who may not know it very well? How do you highlight things? And again, how do you bring that brand of the town out that Clive was talking about? There are other ones around waste management, again, littering and fly tipping, but also around the circular economy and what that means at that town scale. Antisocial behaviour can be a popular use case around video surveillance and crime management, or smart lighting projects, which can often be a solution to some of these problems as well. Some towns are at risk of floods, so flood monitoring and mitigation of that using different sensors around both businesses and homes. and around how we're going to make working part of our town. And there's a big drive, of course, in Wales about flexible working. So how do we manage co-working spaces or different places to work on our high street in different coffee shops and other establishments, and what might a workspace management tool be to actually navigate all of that. The tourism trails, again, let's think about all the trails that are out there. I know Cardigan's got some great ones on their app, but how do we bring those to life in different ways using technology, and also those seasonal trails that might drive footfall in your towns as well. And then finally, footfall analysis, which we know is very popular. So how do you put in the infrastructure to do that? And what are the sensors that you need, and the dashboard and the analytics that follow? So that's kind of a trot through our top 10. I'm now going to launch a poll and give you a minute or so to respond to that. So just... Okay, so you should see the poll there. And if you just think about your top 3, that would be really helpful to us in thinking about how we structure these use cases in our pioneer towns going forward. That's great, lots of activity. In fact, they're all proving quite popular, actually, fairly even spread. Just give that another few seconds to run there. Some people need a little bit more time.
So I'm having trouble accessing the last 2.
Maybe they could scroll down. Is there a scroll bar?
Okay.
I'm not sure what you can do about that.
Yeah, I think there should be a scroll bar. It's great. Okay, I think we've got most of the results in there. So I'll end the polling if that's okay. And I'll just share the results on that now. So you should be able to see that. Great. So I think tourism and parking on the footfall analysis as well, which is right at the bottom. Yeah, footfall analysis at the top. Yeah, followed by tourism and parking. That's great. I think it gives us a good spread. So there's interest in all of them. So they all look fairly viable going forward. We'll take that as input with other analysis that we do, and that will help to start to shape some of the priority use cases that we have in the cohort. So thanks very much for that, and I'll hand back to David.
Thank you, Linda. So now over to Thomas to mention the resource hub he's been developing. Thomas.
Thank you very much, David. So I will also be giving my presentation through the medium of Welsh. So if you want to choose the interpretation option again and select French, feel free to do so now. Felly, diolch David am gyflwyno fi ar cychwyn hyn, a hefyd am y croeso i'r dosbarth Meistr olaf yma. Dwi wedi cychwyn y swydd fel cydlynydd prosiectau arloesol dipyn dros bythefnos yn Llawn, ond dwi'n edrych ymlaen I arwain ar y prosiect cyffroes.
Exciting project, Smart Town, over the...
Cyn y swydd yma, mi o'n I yn gweithio fel gwyddonydd a hefyd yn ymchwilydd ôl-raddedig. Felly dwi wedi cael sawl cyfle i weithio hefo data ac i weld sut allai data helpu a cefnogi penderfyniadau. Felly, yn fy nghyflwyniad byr, dwi yn mynd i ddangos i chi y hwb adnoddau neu'r wefan da ni wedi greu ar gyfer y prosiect yma. A mi byddai'n roed y link rwan yn y chat mwyn i chi hefyd allu mynd ar y wefan hon pam byddech chi eisiau. Felly, mi wna i rannu'n sgrin. Gobeithio bod pob yn gallu gweld y sgrin i. Felly, mae y hwb adnoddau ar gyfer Trefi Smart yn mynd i gael ei leoli ar wefan y hwb menter. Fellwch chi weld ar y top yma bod mae gen Trefi Smart tab i hynna'n lle mae modd cael mynediad at yn hwb adnoddau ni, cael gwybod a cofrestru ar gyfer yn digwyddiadau ni, a hefyd roed y cyfle i chi gysylltu hefo ni. Felly, os byddai yn mynd i'r tab hyn, cawn drosolwg sydyn a wybod cefndir amdan a pam da ni yn cynnal y prosiect yma dros y 12 mis nesaf. A hefyd, mae modd gweld yr amcanion o Dafydd yn gyfeirio at yn gynharach. A gan bod gynnon ni amser, o'n i'n meddwl, waeth i fi rannu'r fideo yma ar y dudalen yma hefo chi. Fideo byr yn dangos sut mae Aberteifi wedi datblygu hynna'n fel tref i fod yn dref smart.
Firstly, there's been a Wi-Fi system installed. Secondly, there's an app system as well. And also we're now looking at the Internet of Things as the next stage as well. Gyda'r system diwyfyr wedi, mae yna 3 elfen i hynna. Mae'n rhoi gwasanaeth diwyfyr am ddim i pobl sy'n dod mewn i dre i pori a e-bost a defnyddio cyfryngau cymdeithasol. Yr ail elfen mae galluogi pobl i falle opto mewn i cyrchlythu'r parteros yn dod o'r dre am pa siopau sy'n ar gael, pa cynnig sy'n ar gael ar werth, a hefyd pa digwyddiadau sy'n ar gael yn y dre. Y trydydd elfen wedyn, mae fe'n rhoi data i'r dre, a felly gwybodaeth i'r siopau dre gyd ynglyn â niferoedd sy'n dre, faint mor aml maen nhw'n dod i'r dre, faint maen nhw'n aros yn y dre am cyfnodau, pa diwrnodau sy'n brysur, a hefyd lot o gwybodaeth ynglyn â gwneud penderfyniadau wedyn ynglyn â paratoi mlaen llaw. Mae yna lychau gael ar adeiladau trwy dre gyd sydd yn cydweithio fel un, a mae'r un trwy dre gyd yn creu beth yn galw mesh wedyn, a mae hwnna'n uno'r cwbl y gilydd creu patrwm rhyngrwyd wedyn ar gyfer y diwyfyr ac yn y blaen. Gyda'r app wedyn, mae hwnna jyst ar gael ar App Store a Google Play Store i lawrlwytho gallu ddyblygu yn Nghymru. Trwy dre gyd hefyd wedyn, mae mapiau dan o'r dre, ar hwnna mae'n o beth yn galw QR code. A chi sy'n defnyddio'r QR code na i lawrlwytho'r app wedyn o unrhyw le yn y dre. Gath yr ariannu gan grant Ewropeaidd ar y pryd, a gath ei wneud yn 2 elfen. Un yn wneud astudiaeth oedd yr angen, yr ail wedyn ar gyfer archebu. Costodd y system tua 10 i 15 mil i ni wedyn, ond mae hwnna'n dibynnu ar maint o'r dre mewn ffordd ynglyn â faint o bocsys yr angen. A wedyn gyda'r app wedyn eto y grant oedd hwnna hefyd trwy Ewrop a Trystiaeth. Oedd hwnna wedi costi tua 6,000 o bunnau i ni. So the next phase now, we're looking at the Internet of Things, using something called Lorawan technology, Lorawan sensors, that gives us more accurate readings, hyperlocal almost. So you could have measures of individual shop footfalls, and they could use that information to relate it to maybe the takings in the till. At the moment, the number of shops in towns has increased in the last year. We've had an additional 14 new shops open since the beginning of 2020. And we're running out of shops for people to actually move into Cardigan at the moment, which is great. Wel ei digas i gyda ni, ni'n gobeithio, yw cael fwy o trefi clyfar ar dros Cymru a ei helpu busnes trwy trefi yma i ffynnu gyda hynny.
Felly mae modd i chi watchad y fideo yna eto os ydych chi yn mynd ar yn gwefan ni, a dwi'n meddwl fod Clive yn y fan yna wedi dangos pa mor ddefnyddiol ydy wedi bod I Aberteifi I ddatblygu I tref I fod yn tref
Town to be a smart town.
Ar gyfer ein adnoddau eraill ni, cafodd eu crybwyll yn Dafydd y Gynharach, ein fideos ni ar gyfer dosbarthiadau Meistr, ein podlediad ni, a hefyd dolenni defnyddiol allu fod o ddefnydd I chi. Mae modd mynd i'r tab Trefi Smart fama a dewis yr opsiwn hwb adnoddau. A wedyn, o fewn yr hwb adnoddau, mae yna link i'n sianel YouTube ni, lle mae fideos o dosbarthiadau Meistr I gyd. Mi fydden ni yn uwchlwytho mwy o fideos, astudiaethau achos i'r sianel yma. Felly adnodd defnyddiol iawn I unrhyw dref sy'n bwriadu fod ar y daith hefo ni I fod yn dref smart. Hefyd, yn bosib I chi wrando ar ein podlediadau. Ar y funud, mond un sy'n gennym ni'n edrych dros y dosbarthiadau Meistr, ond y gobaith yn y dyfodol ydy bod ni yn creu mwy o bodlediadau sy'n ymwneud a trefi smart mwyn gallu rhannu'r adnoddau yma hefo chi. Yn gwylod yr hwb adnoddau, mae yna dolenni ddefnyddiol fydda chi ddefnyddio gan gynnwys dolen yn fan hyn at y meddalwedd patrwm sydd wedi cael ei grybwyll mewn sawl dosbarth Meistr o blaen sy'n caniatáu I trefi weld patrymau ffwtfol a mae'r meddalwedd yma yn agored I rhywun ddefnyddio. Yn drydydd wedyn, mae ganddo ni'r tab digwyddiadau. Ar hyn o bryd, digwyddiadau sydd yma ar gyfer yr gweithdai oedd Clive yn ei sôn am gynharach. Ar hyn o bryd, mae ganddo ni 3 gweithdy allwch chi gofrestru ar gyfer. Felly, drwy fynd ar ein gwefan yn fan hyn, mae modd I chi glicio ar y link yn fan hyn ac I gofrestru ar gyfer y gweithdai. Mi fydd y gweithdai mae'n cael ei rhedeg yn aml dros y 12 mis nesaf. Fel Clive yn sôn, mae yna 3 weithdy, ond mi fydden nhw'n cael ei ailadrodd. Felly, gwnewch siŵr bod chi'n cadw golwg ar ein Eventbrite mwyn gwybod pryd mae'r digwyddiadau yma'n digwydd, a mi fydden ni'n hefyd yn rhannu nhw ar yn cyfrifon cymdeithasol mwyn gadael chi wybod am bob ddigwyddiad neu gweithdai sy'n digwydd. A wedyn, os ydych chi'n berson fel fi sydd wedi dysgu llawer dros y cyfres o dosbarthiadau Meistr, fysa ni yn gwerthfawrogi os fysa chi yn cysylltu efo ni. Mae modd wneud hyn drwy sawl ffordd. Os ydych chi eisiau gyrru e-bost, mae modd gyrru e-bost I grŵp Smart Town, lle fydd modd I ni ateb chi cynnig cyngor I chi neu arwain chi at gyngor. A hefyd mae modd dilyn ni ar y cyfryngau cymdeithasol ar hyn o bryd. Mae gennym ni sianel YouTube a hefyd gyfrif Twitter lle fydd ein gweithgareddau ni a'n digwyddiadau ni yn cael ei rhannu'n aml. Felly, hwn ydy'r hwb adnodd ar yn gwefan ni. Felly, please, os ydych chi efo diddordeb fod yn rhan o'r siwrna yma, da ni'n gobeithio fydd yr hwb yma annog chi a hwyluso'r broses I fod yn dref smart. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Thomas. Diolch chi am fynd i'r ymdrech o greu hwnnw mewn cyfnod byr. Mi fydd o'n datblygu dros y misoedd nesaf yma, gobeithio fod yn adnodd gwerthfawr. So thank you, Thomas, for preparing that in a short period of time. Hopefully it will become a very useful resource going forward. Our last presentation, again, is Clive, and this is it's a separate but related subject matter, and Clive got a prop as well, so I'm looking forward to see his prop. So over to you, Clive.
Yes, diolch, Dafydd. Right, yes, I'll be doing this very brief mention in English. Yeah, so to complement this Smart Town project, the Welsh Government will be contacting all the local authorities in Wales shortly, and to offer them a small number of footfall counting equipment to help those towns which haven't yet got any tech, to help them start on this journey. And as David mentioned, the prop, here we go, it's here it is. So if you remember what Thomas showed in the video with me talking about the system that we have in Cardigan, it's the system that the Welsh Government will be able to provide the local authorities. So hopefully they will be getting the letter in the next week or so. So these units, which I go into more depth into the workshops as an example of systems that are available, they provide free Wi-Fi connected to a broadband connection. They also have within them the capability to take analytical data and collect it and provide a dashboard then for access. So if you've got any questions, obviously in the next section now, which is Q&A, I'm happy to answer what I know. But that is sort of something that the Welsh Government wanted to put out there and to work hand in hand with this project. Diolch, David.
Thank you, Clive. And there was one question there from Abigail. The question was, can you see it, Clive? If you can see it, you can probably...
So the question is, does this include local authorities that have an alternate footfall counter in place? The Welsh Government actually providing this specific unit. If you already have an alternate, you won't need this. It serves you've already got the purpose of it. So this is something to support people that haven't even got anything at the moment, to try and get them start on that journey. So that's what these units are for, and there's a limited number of them as well.
And also to add to that, so the letter will be going to every single local authority in Wales.
Yeah.
So each local authority can make an application for those units.
Yeah, no problem.
And I've been told these are the very latest units, so they are.
Yes, they are
very impressive to people who know.
Cisco Meraki, if anyone wants to look them up.
Yeah. We haven't had many questions, so I was relying really on some questions for this last section, but a few elements I picked up on. We're very keen to collect information on what is happening in Wales now, so we can monitor where we are and monitor where we'll be in 12 months and further afield. So there is an audit which we'll be sharing, and if you could fill that in, and that'll provide intelligence on how things are progressing over the next 12 months or so. And Clive was mentioning the Cisco Meraki system there. Now, we are aware that there are several towns in Wales where there is, this equipment has been set up, but it's not being used. So it's useful for us to know where it's being installed, where it's not being used. Could we provide support to get that equipment back in use? Because it's valuable equipment, it can do a lot of amazing things, and hopefully we could provide the incentive and the support to use that equipment again. We mentioned, or Linda mentioned, this is where we have to define, we have to make the magic happen. So we have the use cases, we have the requirements, and we have the tech. But our responsibility within this project is to make that magic happen, and we also have to do that with contributions from yourselves. Then Linda mentioned the pioneer towns and the use cases. So as part of this package, we also have funding for equipment and for software. It's not a tremendous amount of funding, but we are looking at providing IoT in a box or software as a solution. So we do have funding through this program and other programs to support these use cases. And as Thomas mentioned, we'll be creating more and more content as we go along to share with yourselves and others. I have another question or comment. Will guidance be provided on governance for towns, including cybersecurity and ethics of using data for social, economic and environmental benefits? I would say yes. I would like to refer that to Linda.
Thanks. And thanks for the question, Peter. Yeah, what we're trying to do really is to really engage at the town's level. We know that there's a huge amount of stuff that happens in terms of drawing it back to standards, best practice, and we've got, I think, linkages into all of those, different resources. So what we try to do in the first instance is to kind of engage with the towns in terms of what they need. But as we go on the journey, we will be drawing that back to standards, to frameworks, and to offer support in terms of all of those different areas. So we might not be providing that support directly, but we hope to be able to signpost or bring partners into the project that can provide that kind of support. So very much we're running experiments that we will want to scale, and at the point in which we need to draw this into a more longer term solution that gets into procurement and gets into infrastructure, we can certainly pull all of those elements together, and we actually think that drawing it back to standards is a good way of doing that.
Thank you, Linda. We had a question from Scott Andrews in Conwy. The Welsh Government have launched a Smart Towns Fund. We have an idea in Conwy. How do you go about exploring funding to launch a trial? I would suggest, Scott, that you, in the first instance, contact ourselves, either Thomas or myself, to explore how we can collaborate on taking that forward. So I'd be very keen to speak to you on that, Scott. Victoria Mann has asked a question. Victoria Mann of near me now. What if a town currently have ubiquity unified town Wi-Fi? Will it be sufficient to work with Patrum? That is a question I'm probably technically unable to answer, but the impression I've had so far is Patrum should be able to provide a platform from various data sources. So hopefully it can present data that's been collected through Cisco Mac and other systems, so it should be able to do the same thing with Ubiquity, but I'd have to clarify that. But certainly Patrum as a platform seeks to provide data from footfall, but also data from other data sources, so we're talking air quality, noise pollution, etc. And that is an open platform, and we're quite keen for it to be used across Wales. It's something we developed through LEADER, so the whole point of LEADER is to share lessons learned, and so hopefully we can work with Patrum with councils across the whole of Wales. Clive wants to come in.
Do I?
Oh, sorry. I had Sarah holding a sign saying Clive, so I thought you wanted to.
Yeah, well, no. Well, on the two questions, then, with what Linda mentioned about the ethics side, yeah, this subject was covered in one of the masterclasses about the ethics side of things. So it might be worth just going back to that. But yes, signposting and certainly covering off is something that we need to cover off. And then going back to David, and yes, for example, with the Meraki system, Patrum can pull in data from the Meraki, so it's quite it has a capability of bringing in different systems. So those are the only 2 points I wanted to raise, really.
Thank you, Clive. And also just to add to point regarding the ethics of data collection. So with Patrum, we have been engaged with several groups, the Open Data Group, regarding the responsible use of data. So it's very important to us that we adhere to the standards. So we are now 5-2. I think we've answered all the questions. I think we've covered all the topics. But I would encourage you to connect with us on any subject on Smart Towns, because I'm aware that this is a one-way street, really, in terms of this type of webinar, because I just see Clive, Linda and Thomas and nobody else. So it's important that we should have that dialogue with yourselves going forward over the next 12 months. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion in smaller groups, in these workshops, specialist workshops, etc. So on that, I would like to thank the speakers. Thanks for you for attending, and hopefully we'll see you in person or certainly over Zoom over the next 12 months. So, yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Thank you very much.